Hey everyone, APA Coach Daz here from athleticperformanceacademy.co.uk, and chances are you're looking at this video because you want to know more information about how to do the split squat properly. Well, you've come to the right place, because today I'm going to be taking you through some of the things to look out for and also some of the common mistakes that people make when they're doing this exercise. So to start with, I just want to introduce the classical split squat variation without using any other equipment that you can see here. So we're talking about a nice 90-90 position, a 90-degree angle at the back knee and almost a 90-degree angle at the front knee. And this is the most classically taught split squat position. And the reason that this gets so much attention is because people are often told not to bring their knee over their toes. For me personally, I have got absolutely no problem at all with someone who wants to be in this slightly forward position. But for me, I do like my athletes to learn this position, and it's not because I think that this position is unsafe. It just happens to be that by going forward, we do put more pressure and more emphasis on the knee and the muscles on the front of the thigh. And by just swinging back into this more vertical shin angle, what we find is that we tend to get a nice stretch here on the front of the hip flexor. And because of that reciprocal inhibition, it means that the glutes and the hamstrings can work just a little bit more efficiently. So that would be my kind of key things to think about with the split squat. There are a couple of options here, because if you want to challenge yourself slightly differently, we can do something called the rear foot elevated split squat. It's also known as the Bulgarian split squat. So for me personally, I quite like to introduce the rear foot elevated split squat with a low box. With a low box, I prefer personally to be on the balls of the feet. And again, we're just taking a reasonably long stance. Again, just want to make sure the pelvis is tucked into that neutral position. And again, I'm looking to drop straight down. And you can see here in this position, my knee is quite happy to be driving over the toes. Again, I've got no problem with that, but if you have an athlete who's particularly sensitive at putting extra stress through the knee, you can just walk it out a little bit and you can move them into more of a 90-90 position here, which will take the pressure off the knee and it'll just work that hip flex a little bit more. So again, both of those options are fine. You can also have a look at going on to the high position here. Again, this is going to put, a little bit more stress through the hip flexor muscles, because you're going to be putting your leg into quite extreme hip extension. Again, wherever you feel comfortable. As it stands now, if I drop down here, you'll see that my knee is taking a little bit more strain and stress, which is absolutely fine, provided that your athlete can cope with that. But if you want to put a little bit more emphasis on the posterior chain and just get a little bit better stretch on the hip flexor, you can walk yourself out a little bit further, which means you can drop here and come down. Again, depending on how flexible your athletes are across the front of the hips, will determine whether you need to start maybe with the low box before you progress, or you go on to the high bench. The only other thing that I'd really say about this exercise is that you could also use a low box to create a bit of a deficit. So if you want to get even more flexibility, you can have one foot actually raised on the box, one foot back, and then what you'll notice in this position is that I'm actually able to get my hips below my knee, which is going to put even greater stretch on the hip flexor, and it's also going to activate to a greater extent the muscles around the hamstring and the glutes eccentrically. So again, this is another exercise. And I guess the final thing I would say, just as a little bit of a teaching tool, if athletes are finding it difficult to get that vertical path, you can do a blocked 90-90 position where you actually put your foot underneath the bench, and then this naturally gives you that kinesthetic feedback which blocks your shin from going forward and keeps it in the vertical. And then from here, I've got a nice coach in the form of this high bench at helping me stay vertical. So lots of information there. Hopefully you found it interesting, but in summary, what I would say is it's not about right or wrong. I think it's just about you understanding what the constraints are of your athletes that you're working with. So whether or not they have potentially a history of knee pain, and also if they've got enough flexibility in the hip flexors to be able to cope with a longer stance. And that will be the two main things that will determine whether your athletes are more inclined to lean a bit more forward or stay a bit more neutral. And then the second thing, just to think about, if you want to get a little bit more range, is potentially having a low box that you can use as a deficit. And finally, if you find that the athletes are still struggling with it, consider using the bench as a coach and that blocked 90-90 position, which will help your athletes with that vertical path. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope that's given you some things to think about. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave comments at the bottom of this video, and I'll be happy to answer them and hopefully help you with any questions you have about the split squat. Thanks for listening.